Hello everybody, it's me, the friendly Englishman, back with some more Seer. This is part 12. Thank you so much for watching. This is chapter 11, Gone to Ground. What happens now? The question lingered in the little back room of the Black Bat. Almost as though by being spoken, it had assumed life and substance of its own. The echoes seemed to seep into the soot-stained plaster walls, to crawl into the scarred timber benches and heavy oak table. The uncertain tone recoiled from the stone-lined fireplace, repulsed by the cold breeze whistling down the chimney. Johann Dietrich's companions shared a grim, foreboding look. It had taken 3 of them to keep him from rushing to the crown and 2 chairmen to save his brother from Gustav Volk's doubtful mercy. He was uncertain which of the 3 had struck him with a leather sap, though there was a sinister aspect about the sharp, leathery features of the swarthy Tilian leaning against the room's only door that made him Johann's first choice. The Tilian gave him a sour look in turn, making it clear he didn't care a groat for what Johann thought of him. The other 2 were seated at the table with Johann. One was a burly, wild-haired man wearing a heavy leather slicker and an almost shapeless felt hat. If pressed, Johann would have guessed his vocation as coachman or perhaps barge captain. He had a cunning glint to his eye that reminded him of merchants and other swindlers, but was weathered enough to look like he was no stranger to real work. The second man at the table was less formidable in build, but a good deal more sinister in aspect. He was dressed better than the Tilian and the coachman, his clothes sporting a finery only racketeers and ship captains dared display on the waterfront. The little designs on his eel-skin boots were picked out in gold leaf. The buckle of his belt was a monstrous assemblage of amethyst and jade. The pearl hilts of his matched daggers were shaped like snarling sharks, and each eye was picked out with a tiny ruby. Seeing the daggers, Johann came to the old realization that he knew this man, even if he had never set eyes upon him before. No one in the waterfront had failed to hear of Simo Valkonen. Next to the murder prince Dieter Neff, he was the most infamous assassin for hire in Altdorf. How many of the bloated bodies found floating in the Reich could be credited to Valkonen and his fangs of Stromfels? No one could say for certain. It was certain, however, that Valkonen, the Cold Death, as the criminals of the waterfront had named him, was not offering any official tally of his work. Valkonen. Johann's mind reeled under the implication, the certainty that this formidable hired killer was actually one of the helpers, the servants of the mysterious wizard who had saved his life. What sort of man could command the loyalty of a killer like Valkonen? What sort of man would want to? What happens next largely depends on you. Johann's answer came from a 5th occupant of the little room. When he had regained consciousness, Johann hadn't noticed the little political agitator Ludwig Rothsfels. He took a seat on the bench beside Valkonen and the coachman. The pleasant-faced agitator looked almost ridiculous sitting between the brawny coachman and the sinister assassin, like a cook's ladle set between a pair of swords. "You will be given a choice," Ludwig continued, staring intently into Johann's face. "The same choice all of us were called upon to make. You will be given the opportunity to serve the master and help him in his work." Johann shook his head, snorting with ill humour. "The master and his work," he repeated. "You make it sound very mysterious." "Because it is," growled the Tillian from his place against the wall. The smuggler growled back at the scowling foreigner. "Just the same, I'd like to know what noose you want me to put my neck in." He returned his attention to Ludwig. "Just who is this master of yours, and what is this work he asks you to help him with?" Ludwig seemed to consider the question for a long time, and when he finally answered, there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "We know him by the name of Jeremiah Scrivener, and he is a wizard of terrible power. There are many who serve him, far more than you saw at the Orc and Axe. The master has eyes and ears throughout the city, perhaps even beyond. How many may number themselves among his servants, only he could say." Ludwig paused and sighed deeply, as though remembering some past guilt. "As for his work, Scrivener is devoted to the defense of Altdorf against all those who would bring evil upon the city." Johann stood, shaking his head. "It seems to me he has a strange way of fighting evil." He swung his pointed finger around the room. "A rabble-rouser, a hired killer, a smuggler, a Tillian alley rat." The Tillian pushed himself from the wall, one hand dropping to the slender rapier he wore. "You watch what you call a rat, or I make a nice red grin in your neck." "Armando, please," Ludwig called out. "He does not understand what he said." The Tillian sneered at Johann. "He doesn't understand? They never understand. They bring their dirtied rock into the city. Then Ratkin. They come to take the rock and whatever else they want to take." Armando's face became livid as he saw the incredulous expression on Johann's face. "You'd think maybe I don't know what I talk about, eh, little thief?" He tapped him on the chest. "I'm from Miragliano. I see with my own eyes what rat can do when they take it into their heads to stop slinking in their tunnels." "If the problem is so serious, then why are you sitting around here?" demanded Johann. He trembled as he remembered the ghastly creatures he had fought in the cellar and the hate-filled gaze of their horned leader. "Why doesn't your master notify the authorities? Bring the Reichsguard and the witch hunters and the whole of the Imperial army down upon them." "Because the underfolk are a myth." The hissing words came from the darkened corner of the little room, a space so small that Johann was certain no one could have been there. Even the other men in the room betrayed uneasy wonder as a grey-cloaked figure stepped from the shadows, the darkness swirling about his lean form like little fingers of black fog. The stormy grey eyes of Jeremiah Scrivener met each of his minions in turn, subduing even Armando's anger with the imperious power of his gaze. The wizard's attention lingered on Johann, and the smuggler stumbled back, dropping down onto the timber bench. "They must remain a myth," Scrivener continued. "Ignorance is the best shield the Empire has. The Ratkin themselves are best allies against the threat of the Skaven. While man remains ignorant of their world, the Skaven feel safe to war amongst themselves, pursuing their petty intrigues and vendettas. Given a common foe, given a common purpose, their entire race would unite into a single horde and smother the world of men beneath their numbers. For the survival of the Empire, the underfolk must remain a fable told to children. But you can't just let such monsters go free, protested Johan. He gestured to Ludwig and the other men in the room. They tell me that you are some manner of champion, a fighter against evil. What could be more evil than these rat men? You must fight them. A flicker of approval seemed to pass through Scribner's colourless eyes. The wizard lifted a long-fingered hand, halting Johann's impassioned words. I will fight them. You and your friends brought a terrible thing into this city. In doing so, you have placed Altdorf in great peril. At the same time, you may have saved all who dwell between its walls. Every eye was on the wizard as he swept across the dimly lit room. His hands were beneath his cloak, and when they emerged there was a little lead box gripped between his fingers. Carefully, he set the box down and stepped back. A muffled incantation hissed from Scribner's hidden lips, and an invisible hand opened the catch on the box. The lid sprang back, exposing a little shard of greenish-black rock that glowed evilly in the darkness. Warpstone, gasped Johan. So book foolish men would say, Scribner said. He pointed at the box. What is in there is more dangerous than warpstone. What ignorant scholars once named weirdstone to deceive themselves and cloak their own fears. This is poison and pestilence cast into stone by the foulest of magics. To touch this is to touch death. Kleiner, and my brother. Scribner nodded grimly. They handled the stone, and its evil seeped into their veins. Even the grace of Shalia could not stave off the taint which had ravaged Hans Dietrich. Johann's face became pale. His entire body seemed to wilt as he heard the wizard pronounce his brother's doom. Hans was dead then, taken by the horrible disease that had ravaged him. No, not a disease, but some kind of abominable poison created by the rat men. I will not accept this, Johan snarled. Kempf handled the rock more than my brother. You saw him in the cellar chipping pieces from it to steal for himself. If it was poisonous, he would have fallen ill long before Hans. Kempf was an addict of substance called black dust, a foul derivative of warpstone sold to human distributors by opportunistic Skaven, Scribner said. Use of the drug caused the thief's body to build a greater tolerance to the poison, though he too would have succumbed in time. Your brother, lacking Kemp's voice, was more susceptible to even a slight exposure to the stone. Johan slumped against the table, holding his head in his hands. His last desperate defiance of Scribner's words crushed by the wizard's cold logic. Accepting his explanation, Johan was forced to accept the news that his brother was dead. The stone works upon a simple principle, Scribner continued, this time his words intended for all within the room. It could be likened to a lodestone, only drawn to warpstone instead of metal and operating in far more horrible fashion. It feeds upon warpstone residue trapped within living bodies, drawing it together into tubular, worm-like growths. Warpstone dust is everywhere and in everything, but seldom in concentrations pronounced enough to do harm. This stone, the wizard pointed again at the box. With his gesture, the lid snapped closed once more. This stone draws those harmless traces of warpstone dust into deadly knots of corruption and mutation. I suspect that the stone is even more deadly to the ratkin, whose entire metabolism is saturated with warpstone. Then why would the ratkin create such a thing? Asked Ludwig. Because they do not value the lives of their own, the wizard said. To the Skaven, there is nothing so cheap as the life of a ratman. If they must lose 10 of their own to kill a single enemy, then they count it a bargain, so long as there are not one of the 10. We cannot let the ratkin get away with the plot. The make of Altdorf what they did to Miragliano, Armando raged. There are agents and powers already seeking the stone, Scrivener said. If the Skaven have taken it anywhere in the city, I shall learn of it. Johann lifted his head from the table, hate smouldering in his eyes. They have to be destroyed, he growled, his voice cold as a winter grave. Every last one of them. The wizard nodded his head, his grey eyes burning in the darkness. You will get your opportunity, Johann Dietrich, he said. Scrivener reached to the table, collecting the little lead box. As he removed it, Johann was surprised to see that something had been left in its place. It was a small, flat rectangle of strangely hued gold-like nothing he had ever seen before. The surface of the token was richly engraved with writhing serpents and crawling lizards. A stylized sun peering from between two eclipsing moons, forming the centerpiece of the engraving. My talisman, the wizard said, motioning for Johann to collect the token. All who serve me bear such a coin, he continued, watching as the smuggler's fingers lifted the gold rectangle to his face so that he might inspect it more closely. By accepting it, you become one of my servants. You agree to follow my orders without question or hesitation. You agree to place no loyalty above that which you shall render to me, not that of family, gods, or empire. If I refuse? Johann asked, his eyes never leaving the strange coin. Then you will forget about avenging your brother's death. The wizard's cold words cut through the air like a knife. Johann looked again at the grey-shrouded apparition, trying to fathom the mind that regarded him from behind those sinister, colourless eyes. At last, he nodded and slipped the coin into his pocket. It did not matter to him anymore what Scrivener's motives were, what the wizard's intentions were. It was enough that he promised Johann revenge. For that, Johann would follow the Magister into the mouth of chaos if he demanded it. Suddenly, there was a sound from the chimney, a rustling, scratching noise that set every man in the room on edge. Valkonen's hands whisked daggers from his belt in a blinding flash. The coachman had an ugly-looking mace in his hand, almost before Johann was aware the man had started to move. Armando drew pistol and rapier while Ludwig backed away, a knife clenched in his fist. Every man stood ready for action, their morbid imaginations fired by talk of ratkin and underfolk. Only Scrivener remained as he had been, unperturbed by the sounds descending the chimney. The wizard turned slowly as the noise reached the bottom of the shaft, one hand gesturing at the hearth. Johann saw something dark slip from the opening, dropping onto the hearth with a wet flop. The dark shape shook itself. Then, to the smuggler's alarm, it seemed to expand, growing in size and distorting its shape. Scrivener swung his pointing hand around, gesturing to the table. The thing in the hearth hissed at him, a low serpentine noise that made Johann's skin crawl. The dark shape launched itself into the air, gliding across the room to land atop the table. Johann recoiled from the gruesome thing. It was coated from beak to talon in soot, so he could make no guess as to its true colour, but its shape and nature were far too apparent. What was under the soot was not feathers, but reptilian scales. The long beak was filled with sharp little teeth. The wings were leathery and bat-like. A long tail stretched behind the thing, lending it even greater resemblance to some nightmarish union of snake and falcon. The flying lizard's yellow eyes stared at Johann, and it took a shuffling hop towards him. Then, suddenly, Scrivener's voice drew its attention away from the smuggler. Johann could not understand the slithering, hideous noises that rose from the Magister's muffled face. If they were words, then they were such words as did not belong on the tongues of men. His horror increased when he observed the ghastly lizard hawk bobbing its head and fluttering its wings seemingly in response to Scrivener's hissing speech, as though the hideous thing were conversing with him. Scrivener turned away from the lizard hawk, again sweeping his gaze across the room. "The stone has been found," he said. He stared at the coachman, fixing the burly man with his stormy gaze. "Take word to all who participated in operations at the Orc and Axe. Bring Grimbold Silverbeard. His knowledge is vital if the foe goes to ground. All operatives are to wait me at the old De Argentiso house in the Reichhof Parkstrasse." The coachman sketched a deep bow and hurried to carry out his orders. Scrivener watched him go, then considered his remaining minions. "The rest of you will accompany me." His grey eyes drifted back to Johann, this time with a terrible scrutiny that made the smuggler even more uncomfortable than the renewed interest the lizard hawk had displayed in him. "Perhaps we will even be in time for Herr Dietrich to have his revenge," Scrivener said, with a trace of heaviness in his tone. Grey Seer Thanquol watched as the last of the subjects twitched and writhed on the floor of their cage. It turned out that Bernfang hadn't needed as many subjects as the pool of Thanquol's less useful minions had provided. He was pragmatic about the situation. Even if there was nothing worthwhile to be learned by exposing the ratmen to the wormstone, it made for a most effective method for exterminating individuals who would certainly be looking for some chance at revenge if Thanquol allowed them to live. No, it was better not to risk their petty and vindictive treachery and simply get rid of them along with the others. Bernfang and his warlock engineers were scurrying about the kitchen laboratory, grinding down the last of the wormstone and pouring the contents into wine bottles. Thanquol remembered the way the thieving humans had used vinegar to mask the smell of the wormstone from the Skaven. He thought the sour wine from the cellar might do the same, though whether it could deceive something like the warp bats of Clan Moulder or some of Scratch Scarpaw's slinking backstabbers, Thanquol was uncertain. The less consideration he gave to Grey Seer Thanquol using magic to find the wormstone, and himself, the more comfortable he was. The sooner he eliminated the threat of that corrupt old rat and the entire treasonous council of Under Altdorf, the better. Thinking of Under Altdorf and the doom that would soon descend upon it, Thanquol abandoned his morbid observation of the corroding captives. He strode across the kitchen to the small parlour beyond, Bone Ripper trudging after him like a faithful hound. He had made the parlour into his command nest, filling it with such opulence as the mouldering furnishings of the abandoned townhouse could provide. A small entryway beyond the parlour opened upon the street. One of Scrim's sneaks was posted there, watching through the grimy windows, waiting to give warning should any human invaders descend upon Thanquol's refuge. Similar lurkers were posted in the cellar and basement of the townhouse. These were separate rooms beneath the structure, the cellar connected to the kitchen, the basement reached only by a hidden door in what had been the study. Tunnels connected both of the subterranean rooms to the underworld of the Skaven. If attackers came from beneath the townhouse rather than from outside, then the Thanquol would use whichever tunnel his Ratkin enemies didn't to make his escape. And if they somehow discovered both entrances... Thanquol patted the remaining ratskin scroll tied to his belt. He had inspected the document very carefully, assuring himself that the magic it professed to evoke was no forgery. To use such magic would mean abandoning his minions, but that was a sacrifice that didn't cause a second of doubt. It was, after all, the duty of the common ratmen to give his life that the brilliance and fortitude of their betters should endure. Why, if they had the intelligence to see it, creatures like Scrim Nortail and Viscit Burnfang could not fail to understand that the greatest accomplishment they could hope for in their dreary, scrabbling little lives would be to die for the glory of Grey Seer Thanquol. Sadly, the wretches did not have such vision. As he entered the parlour, Thanquol found Scrim leaning over the teakwood chest upon which the Grey Seer had set the stolen maps and diagrams. There was a furtive, suspicious quality about the spy's manner that made Thanquol's lip curl. Bone Ripper sensed his master's disquiet, and a threatening growl rumbled through the rat ogre's barreled chest. Scrim scrambled away from the chest, claws clutching the badly chewed stump of his tail. Age had dulled the spy's senses, allowing even something of Bone Ripper's size to steal upon him unawares. Any Skaven in such a state was near the end of his race, the ravages of time leaving him easy prey to younger, faster upstarts. "Fine smell anything interesting?" Thanquol challenged as he stepped to the chest and peered down at the maps. Bone Ripper lurched around the parlour, placing his bulk between the cowering spy and the doorways leading into the hallway proper and the old study. The Grey Seer chuckled at his monster's initiative. With himself between Scrim and the kitchen and the rat ogre placed where he was, the only path of retreat left open to the spy was a quick dash into the street outside. Allowing, of course, that the lurker at the threshold chose helping Scrim over occurring the wrath of the Grey Seer. "No, no, mighty one," Scrim insisted, dipping his head in deference to Thanquol. "I was merely spying," Thanquol growled. Scrim was so taken aback by the fury with which the Grey Seer spoke the word that he actually started to nod his head. Thanquol glared at Scrim, taking a menacing step closer, flickers of power burning in his eyes. "And what did we find seek, crooked-backed sneak?" Nothing, most baleful holiness," Scrim insisted, wringing his hands together. Scrim not read dwarf letters. Thanquol's fangs gleamed in the dingy light of the parlour. Scrim shivered as Bone Ripper's colossal shadow fell across him. Then how did you know they were dwarf runes if you could not read them? Thanquol's paw rose, a nimbus of green energy gathering about his claws like a nest of swirling fireflies. Scrim collapsed to the floor, fear musk spurting from his glands, his mind trying to find some combination of falsehood and flattery that would appease the Grey Seer's rage. More realistically, he prayed to the horned rat for mercy. Sharp squeals of terror and pain sounded from the kitchen. The glow faded from Thanquol's paw as the Grey Seer spun about, his body a confusion of anger and alarm. Wet, ripping sounds and bestial snarls thundered from the makeshift laboratory as Bernfang and his attendants burst through the door and spilled into the parlour. The clan scryer ratmen scrambled through the command nest, spilling furnishings and tearing tapestries in their headlong flight. One warlock engineer crashed into Thanquol, then careened onwards to upset the teakwood chest and spill the stolen maps across the floor. Before Thanquol could hurl a curse against the Skaven who had knocked him over, Bone Ripper's fist closed about the coward's head, crushing both his iron helm and the skull inside it like an egg. A familiar scent snapped Thanquol's attention from his bodyguard's gruesome work. It was a smell the Grey Seer had hoped to never encounter again. The stench of a beast that should be lying cooked, charred, and very dead somewhere in the man-thing's scat streams. Instead, the burnt, ravaged, skull-like head of the rat beast glared at him from the doorway of the kitchen. The badly chewed torso of the clan school sneak delegated to watch the cellar tunnel lodge was exposed in its mouth. The monster chittered hungrily, its eyes more like pools of blood than things capable of vision. Thanquol scuttled away from the thing's approach, keeping on all fours so as to not arouse its interest by rising from the floor. The Grey Seer needn't have bothered. The rat beast lifted its mangled snout and sniffed at the air. It snarled, then, with a savage leap, propelled its immense body into the nearest warlock engineer. The Skaven shrieked as half the bones in his body were shattered by the rat beast's bulk. It perched above him like a lion with its prey, and its dripping jaws began ripping at the ratmen's leather smock and man-gut harness. Fresh screams from the Skaven beneath the rat beast's paws brought Thanquol leaping to his feet. The other Skaven were watching the gory spectacle with terrified fascination. Thanquol snarled at them, trying to snap the fools back to their senses. While the monster was eating the clumsy fool, the rest of them could escape. They could use the basement tunnel. There was no need to fight past the brute to reach the cellar. Before the creature was half finished with its meal, they could all be many rest stops away. It was a sound plan until Thanquol glanced back at the monster savaging Bernfan's minion. The beast was not eating the ratman, it was tearing open the leather bag he carried. Wine bottles rolled free and the monster lost interest in the crushed Skaven. It scurried after the bottles. With a shriek of horror, Thanquol and the other Skaven watched as it raised one immense paw and brought it smashing down into one of the bottles, exposing the syrupy mix of wormstone and dust and wine. Almost before the suicidal madness of such action could register with the onlookers, The rat beast brought its muzzle close to the foul mixture. A scabby tongue flicked from its snout, lapping up the poisonous concoction. Where a moment before Thanquol had been eager for escape, now his blood boiled with outrage. The dumb animal was eating the warpstone. It was actually eating the Grey Seer's chance for glory and revenge. Thanquol spun about on his heels, his staff raised over his head. He glared at Bone Ripper. The rat ogre still stood between the hall and the sturdy archways, the dead warlock engineer dangling from his hand. The dull-witted monster was fully occupied, batting the dead ratman with his other hands, fascinated by the way the broken body swayed back and forth when he hit it. "Lumbering, witless flea food!" Thanquol snarled, slamming his staff against Bone Ripper's thigh. The huge rat ogre cringed from the blow, fear clouding his beady little eyes. Thanquol ignored the brute's reaction, instead pointing a claw at the feeding rat beast. "Kill that thiefy beast, you brainless oaf thing! Kill, kill! Kill, kill!" Each command inflamed Bone Ripper's aggression. Each snarl from Thanquol's voice brought the fur on the rat ogre's neck bristling. Drool dripped from Bone Ripper's jaws as the monster let loose with an earth-shattering roar. The rat beast looked up from its frantic feeding just in time to be bowled over as Bone Ripper flung the carcass of the warlock engineer into its face. The rat beast was knocked back by the morbid missile, toppling head over tail until it smashed into the wall of the parlour. Plaster rained down upon it from the battered. It hissed savagely as it lifted itself and shook its mangy pelt free of plaster. It spun about to challenge Bone Ripper, but the rat ogre was already upon it. The townhouse shook as Bone Ripper launched himself at the staggered rat beast. The huge brute charged across the parlour, slamming into the rat beast with the impact of a battering ram, the huge spike on his shoulder guard impaling the creature through the chest as he drove his body into it. The force of the impact drove both monsters onwards, and nothing so humble as timber and brick and stone was going to stop them. The wall collapsed in a shower of rubble as Bone Ripper smashed the rat beast through the parlour wall back into the kitchen. A table vanished in a cloud of splinters as both of the huge brutes hurtled onto the kitchen floor. Bone Ripper was the first to rise, tearing his gory shoulder spike free of the rat beast's mangled body. The fresh surge of pain inflicted by the withdrawal of the spike brought a shriek of agony from the rat beast. In a frenzy of pain, the creature flung itself from the rubble, launching on to Bone Ripper. Even the rat ogre's prodigious strength was not enough to overwhelm the bulk of the rat beast. Like its smaller kind, the rat beast scrabbled at Bone Ripper with all four of its clawed paws, tearing deep furrows in the rat ogre's leathery hide. The rat-like jaws of the beast snapped and slashed at Bone Ripper's head, trying to work through or around the armour of his helmet to reach the soft skin of his throat. Bone Ripper staggered, trying to stay upright with the weight of the rat beast pulling at him and threatening his balance. Even his brutish mind understood that if he fell, he would be finished, his foe free to tear out his throat. With two of his arms, he tried to grapple the beast. His mutant third arm, its hand fitted with steel and spike, struck again and again into the beast's side until it was coated in blood. The rat beast chittered its feral ferocity at Bone Ripper, each blow only serving to excite its terrible vitality even more. Rather than fading beneath the force of the punishment the rat ogre was delivering, the beast seemed to be empowered by it. Snapping jaws closed against the side of Bone Ripper's face, tearing away an ear and part of his cheek armor. Bone Ripper responded with a savage grip, his mighty arms straining as they bent the rat beast's body upward and back. With a wet pop, the beast's hind legs fell limp, flopping uselessly against the rat ogre's waist. The beast vomited black blood from its jaws, spattering Bone Ripper's armor, but refused to abandon its efforts to reach its foe's throat. Bone Ripper felt incisors scrape against the side of his neck, drawing a thin trickle of blood. With another thunderous roar, Bone Ripper threw the rat beast from him. It crashed in a broken heap against the old larder, crushing the last of Bernthang's test subjects beneath it. Bone Ripper was not satisfied, however. The rat ogre stomped after the quivering wreckage of the beast, pounding its prone form mercilessly with its huge fists. The wet smacks of fist into dripping meat were a fitting applause to such a primitive, bestial spectacle. Hearing Bone Ripper's triumphant bellow, Thanquol decided it was safe enough to creep into the kitchen. A few of his fellow followers crept after him, not willing to risk upsetting the Grey Seer if his bodyguard had indeed vanquished the terrible rat beast. Thanquol sneered at their cowardice. Boldly, he stepped to Bone Ripper, swatting the rat ogre's flank with the butt of his staff. "Fool meat," Thanquol snarled. "Leave dead thing. There is work to do." The Grey Seer turned and glowered at his shivering underlings. "Recover the spilled wormstone," he snapped at Bernthang. "Hide your dead as well. My enemies must find smell no sign that I was here." "What of the monster?" Bernthang growled back. "Is it too big to move or hide?" Thanquol glared at the Warlock engineer. "Then leave it. Dung-breathed toad. Do not pester my brilliance with your stupidity, Tinker-rat." The Grey Seer lifted his gaze to the other surviving Skaven, both of Clan Scryer and Clan Skull. "We waste no more time," he declared. "We take the wormstone to the reservoir. Then the man-things will suffer for defying the will of the horned rat." The Grey Seer looked past the throng to see Scrim skulking in the shadows. He pointed a clawed talon at the slinking spy. "Your tail will lead you through the tunnels," he said. His eyes became as cold as those of a snake, and Scrim felt his insides shrivel as Thanquol snarled words he knew were meant for him alone. "Your tail knows the way." As the Skaven began to scurry from the gory ruin of the old kitchen, none of them gave a second glance to the dripping mass of meat and fur splashed against the larder, nor to the hate-filled eye that sullenly watched them go. That was the end of chapter 11. That was a cool fight with Bone Ripper. I really like it a lot. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you all again very soon. Goodbye.